Welcome back to the Dershow. I'm not going to say the E word. This is an E-free show. Nothing about E. And so we're going to get right to the major issue, of course, of the sentencing today of that mass murderer. But before we do that, just one little item of international news. Hamas today, again, refused to make a deal with Israel. The mediators have blamed it all on Hamas. They said that Hamas has now changed three aspects of what was previously agreed on. And so Hamas doesn't want to make a deal. It's perfectly prepared to see Gazans die. By the way, they're not starving to death to the extent that maybe one or two have had malnutrition. It's because Hamas has been stealing their food. There's a video out there showing Hamas fighters eating, gorging themselves with food in the tunnels while the people upstairs are missing dessert. Nobody is being denied the food necessary to live by Israel. They may be denied that by Hamas, but Hamas is the one who wants to prolong the war. It thinks it's winning the war of public relations, and it is on college campuses. So why should it stop? It's winning it on CNN. It's winning it in the pages of the New York Times. So, of course, the media is incentivizing it to continue to fight and to allow Palestinians to die. Every Palestinian civilian who dies hurts Israel and helps Hamas. So let's understand the dynamics here. And the dynamics make it very difficult to achieve peace while the media is continuing to blame Israel for the deaths that are caused by Hamas. All Hamas has to do is give back the hostages, lay down its arms, and not a single person in Gaza will die. That's all in Hamas's hands. Okay, so let's turn now to the case of Brian Kohberger. All we know is he's a cold-blooded killer who, in the middle of the night, came to a house of college kids, wonderful college kids with great futures, terrific, wonderful people. We heard from their relatives today how much they're missed. And with no apparent justification, just slaughtered them in cold blood. Four of them, and two of them were not killed and were still victims, but managed to escape. And so now we have the situation where they came to the prosecutors and they offered a deal that in exchange for pleading guilty and waiving any right to appeal, they would get spared execution. Obviously, there is the death penalty where this crime occurred, and they would have gotten the death penalty had they been convicted. Almost no doubt about that. But they made a deal. Let's make a deal. That's the way the criminal justice system works. I mentioned yesterday, in the halls of justice, the only justice takes place in the halls. There's a debate whether that was Lenny Bruce or Abby Hoffman, but one of those two brilliant comedians came up with that aphorism, which is pretty much true. This was a deal struck in the halls. And some of the families were very dissatisfied with it. And I understand that. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. But anybody who's, God forbid, God so horrendous to even think about, whose child was murdered in cold blood, would want vengeance, would want to see death imposed on the killers. And we heard that today in the courtroom where people were very dissatisfied. And one guy was just, you could see just holding back, trying to jump over the rail and do something to this man. I can easily identify with that. Just I don't want any of you to have to think about what would happen if somebody killed one of your children in cold blood like this, but you would, whether you favor the death penalty or not in general, you would favor the death penalty in this particular case. And my view is that, I've been opposed to the death penalty from the time I was a teenager, maybe even before that. But if there's ever a case for the death penalty, obviously it's this one. Now, we don't know what the conceivable motive was. Maybe there was no motive. We just don't know. And the judge made some very thoughtful comments. What he said was, look, why should we even be asking what the reason is? That gives agency and power to the murderer. We shouldn't really care about that, because if we care about it, it gives him the power to deny us the information that we would like to have. Isn't it better really to say it's irrelevant what the motive is? Let this guy rot in prison until he has to rot in hell. Isn't that a better way to go? That was the judge's view, and he said it was a very personal view, and I understand it. What I don't understand is the district attorney. And I just don't understand the district attorney making a deal that didn't require what deals almost always require. When you make a deal, when you get something in exchange for not getting long imprisonment or the death penalty, almost always the requirement is that you then fully disclose in great detail everything about what you did and anything about other people who may have done it with you. That doesn't seem to be the case here. But full disclosure is always required. And in fact, the deals say, I know I've signed these deals, I've drafted these deals, that any deviation from the truth means that the deal's off and you can get the death penalty or you can get the longer prison term if you don't tell the full and complete and whole truth. Now, when the defendants came through their lawyers to the DA, I don't know why the DA didn't say, all right, we're prepared to consider the possibility of eliminating the death penalty in exchange for a plea of guilty and a waiver of all appeals. But you have to be willing to state, either orally or in writing or both, in the court, outside of the court, why you did this and precisely what you did, where you were, how did you get there, everything. You have to make a full and complete disclosure. And if you lie in one iota, we come back and give you the death penalty. What's the downside of doing that? Now, I don't know whether the DA asked for it and the defendant said, no, I won't do it. I can't imagine that. Why would the defendant care? All he cared about is saving his own rear end, and he's done that. And he will die in prison. But who knows? Maybe after 30, 40, 50, 60 years, 70 years, who knows? But he will die in prison, but he will not be executed. It's an interesting case today you may have seen in Tennessee, where a man is going to be executed on October 7th or 8th, and he has a pacemaker. And he wants to have the pacemaker removed because he's afraid that after he's injected, the pacemaker might still keep him alive and in pain. And the court has ruled that the pacemaker has to be removed, and maybe the state is appealing it. So, the method by which death is produced is always controversial, and it's the last usually stand of death penalty opponents. They generally oppose the method. In Utah, you have a choice. You can either be shot or die in another way. In some jurisdictions, they had until very recently hanging. And the electric chair. I remember seeing the electric chair once when I went to prison. Another time when I was representing two young boys on death row whose life I ultimately saved. They were in a prison cell right next to the gas canisters that were going to kill them. They were going to get the gas chamber. And every night they went to sleep looking at the gas canisters that were going to kill them. And when I went to see them, one of them was crying, and he just, couldn't bear the thought. But fortunately, I argued the case in the Supreme Court and ultimately won the case in the Arizona courts. And there, as far as I know, they're still in prison, but their life has been saved. I did it free pro bono for the American Civil Liberties Union. And so I keep up a little bit with the progress of these two young men. They were 18 and 19 when they committed the crimes for which they were sentenced to death, but now they're in prison and they're eligible for parole. I'm told that's conceivable. It's now been, 40 years. Maybe they will get out. I don't know. It's a very interesting case. I wrote about it in my book, The Best Defense, the Tyson brothers. And in the movie Reversal of Fortune, they were portrayed as the Johnson brothers, but it's the same. It's the same case. So that they could easily have, the prosecution could have said, you have to make full disclosure, otherwise we're not going to make this deal. But they didn't do that. Now, it's interesting that the judge made a comment saying, why do you want to have full disclosure from this creep? Um, would you believe a word he said anyway? What he might say is, self-aggrandizing, or in some way an attempt to minimize his moral guilt, or not his legal guilt. I don't know. It's a hard call, but I think on balance, it would have been much better had there had been a deal that would have included the requirement that he do certain things, that he publicly apologize to the victims. A lot of good that does, and maybe the victims didn't even want that. But more importantly, the circumstances, all the circumstances of everything that led up to this, and why. I mean, it's so absurd. I remember studying very carefully the famous case in Chicago where two young men, Leo Frank and Leopold, decided just to kill somebody for the thrill of killing them and seeing if they can get away with it. They were the dumbest criminals in history. They left the glasses behind. They were immediately caught. And they had, fortunately, they were a wealthy family. And so they had Clarence Darrow defending them, and managed to get a life sentence instead of the death penalty. Then turns out maybe there was some money transacted. No, we don't know. There were all kinds of accusations. This was, after all, Chicago in the 1920s, and nothing is beyond the realm of possibility. In any event, Darrow, who didn't lead the most ethical life or the most ethical practice, saved their lives, and one of them, Loeb, was killed in prison shortly thereafter, and Leopold lived a very, very good life in prison. It became part of an experiment for some serious diseases, and ended up getting out of prison for the final year or two of his life that he was able to live at liberty before he died. So, you can take many positions on the death penalty. And when Leopold and Loeb explained why they killed, they couldn't really explain it. I think they had read Nietzsche and read some philosophers, and, decided they wanted to see what it felt like. So they took an innocent boy, a young, I don't remember, 14, 15-year-old neighbor, and murdered him just to see what it felt like. And of course, they deserved to get the death penalty, but Clarence Darrow saved their lives. So I have some understanding of the judge's position. Why do we want to know? And we should stop wanting to know, because the more we want to know, the more it empowers this horrible person to withhold information from us. If we say, as the judge said, we don't give a damn why you did it, that's your perversion. That's your ridiculousness. All we know is you did it, and you did it in a horrible way. That's enough for us. We don't care about your explanation. Don't even bother to give us your explanation. That's an approach, and I understand that approach. And I didn't think that was the right approach until I heard the judge make his statement, and the judge kind of persuaded me that maybe he was right. He didn't persuade me that the DA was right in not asking for it. Maybe in the end we should disregard it, but I don't think denying the family the right to hear something from him was justifiable. So, you all make your own decisions. I'm sure there are many people out there who are opposed to the death penalty. For them, it's a just result, life imprisonment. There are probably some out there who say everybody who kills should get the death penalty. That's what the Bible says, basically. And there are those who say, like many, that it should depend on the circumstances of the case. And for those for whom it depends on the circumstances of the case, then you want to know the circumstances. Yeah, you want to know what craziness may have motivated this guy to walk into a couple of bedrooms, and just kill helpless people who were sleeping, who they didn't know, strangers who they had nothing against. So, as a person who has studied criminal justice for more than 60 years, I think I took my first class in criminal justice close to 70 years ago in college from Professor Wilson. Of course, I'm dying to know what went through this perverted man's perverted brain and emotions that would allow him to do it. I mean, none of us can imagine standing over somebody sleeping in bed, innocent, beautiful, and just plunging a knife into them and killing them. It's incomprehensible. And, curiosity, we want to know. Could we ever know? Probably not. Probably we would never know, because probably he is incapable of telling the truth. He probably doesn't really know why he killed. It may have been just impulsive, although it was planned. I mean, there was a lot of preparation going into this. It wasn't just that he met somebody in the street, took out his knife, and killed them. There have been those cases as well. There's so much killing. You see every weekend now in Chicago and New York and other places, often in front of or in nightclubs, there are killings. They're just people kill each other. It's just horrible, the murder rate in this country. I know we can have a great debate. It doesn't have anything to do with the wide availability of guns. Wouldn't they kill with knives? After all, this guy didn't kill with a gun. He killed with a knife. You could debate that all you want. And there are reasonable arguments on all sides. I do believe that the easy availability of illegal guns in the country is a factor in why some murders were committed that probably wouldn't have been committed had there been no easily available guns. But again, you can get back to that argument: the guns kill or the people kill. Well, it's people with guns who kill. So, but here we have people with knives who kill. So, very unsatisfying resolution. He's going to be taken off to prison. Probably we'll never see him again. It's probably the last time he'll ever appear in public. He'll die in obscurity if he's not killed in prison. And we know that the highest crime rate in the world occurs not on the streets of cities, but in prisons. And that's why getting sentenced to a jail or a prison is often more than a life sentence. It's very, very often a death sentence. So we remember Whitey Bulger got killed in prison. I was just talking about Loeb from the Leopold and Loeb case. And there are so many other cases of people who have been killed in prison. People also commit suicide in prison because prison's a horrible place. Jeffrey Epstein, was he killed or did he commit suicide in jail? That's an issue. Oh, I said I wouldn't mention Jeffrey Epstein. I'm so sorry. I didn't mention him in connection with anything that's sex. I apologize. It just slipped out. What can I tell you? You can't have a show. You can't have a conversation without the E word popping up. Apologize. I'm sorry. Okay. So this is the last we'll hear from Kohberger. There is no appeal. There is no commutation. His fate is sealed. Whether he survives prison or not, that's up in the air. We don't know whether he gets special protection because of his notoriety. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But at the very least, he deserved life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. And I leave it to you to decide whether he also should have gotten the death penalty, at the risk of possibly getting one juror who might have said, "No, I don't like the death penalty, so I'm going to acquit him." There's always that possibility, but unlikely in this case. And even if you have one juror, so you get a second jury trial, you get a hung jury, you get a second jury trial. So I don't get why the DA made the deal he made. He said he wanted to give closure to the family. Yeah, that's just nonsense. He said there were motions that would have taken decades. That's nonsense. Motions don't take decades. They're always denied. And then they're appealed. So it might take a year or two. It's not going to take decades. And that's not the reason for making the deal. The reason for making the deal is closure and finality. And that's what we've gotten in this case at a very, very, very high cost. Okay, let's turn to some letters. Why didn't Maxwell make a plea bargain before she was sentenced? Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I doubt she was offered a plea bargain. Remember, if Jeffrey Epstein had stayed alive, she would have been offered a plea bargain. She would have been offered an opportunity to testify against Epstein in exchange, perhaps, for no jail time or a shorter sentence. But he was dead, so she had to be the person standing trial. As I've said before, when I used to teach my students criminal law, you're going to commit crimes, always commit crime with somebody more important than you. So when she was committing her alleged crime, she was committing them, allegedly, with a person much more important than her, Jeffrey Epstein. But unfortunately for her, he died. And so she was number one. She was the most important, and she got the full brunt of the law. So I doubt there was a plea bargain offered. You should represent her. No, I shouldn't represent her. My former student research assistant, who's a phenomenal lawyer, David Marcus, is representing her and doing a great job. And so I am not representing her, though my teaching is probably part of the representation. I'm so sorry to hear about Roy Black. I remember that case. I didn't know he married one of his jurors. It's a great case. And it was William Kennedy Smith, you remember? He had sex with a young woman who he picked up in some bar in Palm Beach. And they had, I think, sex on the beach. And she claimed rape. He said consent. Her stockings were found in the car. That suggested maybe she took them off. In anticipation. I don't know. I don't remember the facts of the case. I do remember this. Ted Kennedy called me and said, Alan, I don't know this guy, Roy Black. Everybody says he's a great lawyer, but keep an eye on him. And if he loses, I want you to do the appeal. So watch the case carefully. Of course, I did. And Roy did a phenomenal job. And then it turns out that one of the jurors, he married 2 years later. And I've been to their house several times. They seem to have had a wonderful, wonderful marriage. They had a son, and tragically he died at age 80, I think, of cancer. But he was a great man. He was really the dean of the Miami Criminal Justice Bar. So I'm sad to see him go. I want to correct the New Zealand example. Unlike white Protestant colonizers of New Zealand, Jews have deep roots in the land of Israel historically and spiritually. No, that was my point. My point is New Zealanders have no right to complain about Israel. They call Israel colonialist. Israel was anti-colonialist. Israel fought against the British. It blew up the King David Hotel, which was the place where all the British people who were running the colonialist regime were staying. The two underground organizations were the most anti-colonialist possible. They hanged 2 British soldiers. And they fought against Great Britain. The idea that they're colonialists is the most absurd thing. Who were they colonialists for? They didn't have any country. They were thrown out of Poland and Russia and all the other countries. Whereas New Zealand, every Protestant, white Protestant who lives in New Zealand today could easily return to England or to move to Australia. Where did the Jews of Israel go? They were denied any right to live in Europe. They were murdered. All their homes were taken away from them in Poland and Germany and Yugoslavia and every other place. So you can't imagine anything as different as New Zealand, the true colonial settled state, and Israel, an anti-colonial state, but not on college campuses and not in New Zealand. New Zealand is one of the most anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and now increasingly anti-Semitic countries in the world. Talk about chutzpah. Wow, that really is chutzpah. For New Zealand to complain about colonialism. Okay. Let's see. Why does Dershowitz never say, he was a student of mine and he's a terrible lawyer? Well, I have a few that I could say that about, but I'm not going to say that publicly. And, here's another one who says, how can you tell when an attorney is lying? His lips are moving. Actually, attorneys lie less than almost any other profession because there are actually consequences if an attorney lies. Obviously, journalists lie all the time. Politicians lie all the time, and there are no consequences. If lawyers lie, they can be disbarred. And so I think, not because lawyers are any more moral, but I think they have greater incentives not to lie. So, the result is that, lawyers, let me give you an example. What you might think is lying. This is an example I used to use in my criminal law case. Guy comes to you and says, I've just been charged with robbing a bank, and I want you to plead me guilty, and I think I'm going to win because the teller who was at the bank when I robbed it, he admits he robbed it, was wearing glasses, thick glasses. And when I went up and put my gun and got the money from her, she had taken her glasses off and she was brushing her hair. And if you cross-examine her and ask her, were you wearing your glasses? She's going to have to say no, and then maybe I'll get acquitted. Can you do that as a lawyer? You know he's guilty, but you also know the truth is she weren't wearing glasses. And if you get her to admit the truth, it's the jury that infers from that maybe she didn't see him correctly. That's the kind of deception that lawyers do engage in and are not only entitled to engage in, but are obligated to engage in, even if they're representing guilty defendants. So that's the dilemma. That's the dilemma that lawyers face. All right, last question. Sometimes famous people are given worse treatment by the justice system than the median accused. Martha Stewart is a good example, and I think that's absolutely right. There are very wealthy people who have been prosecuted for crimes that less wealthy. Donald Trump, obviously, is the perfect example. Nobody would ever dream of prosecuting anybody for what he was prosecuted for. But, he was running for president, and the Democrats would do anything to prevent him from being president. So you're absolutely right. There are going to be many examples of wealthy and powerful people that are subjected to a double standard. It's also true that poor people with no resources, people who can't hire lawyers, are often treated terribly, as was it Lord Acton who said, the law in its majestic equality prohibits both the rich and the poor from sleeping on park benches. Yeah, it's true. But of course, it only applies to the poor. So we have a system, a dual standard of justice. The rich, the powerful, the poor, many people under those circumstances are treated unequally. Probably the people who get the most justice are obscure people in the middle who nobody has a stake in either convicting or acquitting. That's when you get some degree of fair justice. So look, the quest for justice goes on. The Bible commands, justice shall you pursue. Tzedek tirdof in the Hebrew. And why is the word justice repeated? Well, as an appellate lawyer, I argue that the word justice is repeated is because you'll often lose a trial. You need to have a second shot at justice on appeal, but there are many, many other interpretations. Give me your interpretation if you write me a letter. Any event, see you next week.